Some years ago, I met a 26-year-old named Steven who possessed the articulacy of a movie character. To say this man spoke with precision would be a gross understatement. Every word had weight. There was never a verbal misstep. Every sentence was tight. Tight speeches having minimum redundancy. The idea is as concise as possible with no extra detail or long-windedness. I had asked Steven how he became so well-spoken, and his answer was that he watched the television show Mad Men on a regular basis. Every night he would watch 2 episodes and would repeat the dialogue delivered by the show's protagonist, Donald Draper. This calibrated his mind to mirror the language patterns from the show. Steven also introduced me to another method that enriched his process of sourcing what seemed to be the perfect words. And this was the practice of reviewing verbal disfluencies in his communication. Verbal disfluencies were stumbles in his speaking where he couldn't find the right combination of words. He knew there was a way to articulate the idea he was trying to communicate, but the result was coarse and chaotic. Setting aside time to review these lapses in language eventually gave him the ability to generate sentences on demand that were clear and concise, and frankly sounded as if they'd been written. The screenwriter Rod Serling was once asked, "How do you speak like a writer?" To which he replied in his signature contemplative manner, "My tightness with speech comes from having assembled the language puzzle 1,000 times in my writing. Each time I find a more efficient way to arrange the pieces until I'm solving it correctly every time I speak." If we imagine our lexicon as a puzzle, there exist many unsolved sections of this puzzle that we thoughtlessly scatter pieces into when we speak. Each piece represents a word or expression. We're aware that most of the time we're not solving the verbal puzzle correctly. It's good enough, but it could be more aligned. And we can't determine where these disfluencies are in advance. We can only identify them by tripping over them in our communication. This gives us an opportunity to solve these verbal bumps so that next time we encounter them, we can fit words together and create a better puzzle or picture. One of the epiphanies I had about speaking is that your ability to solve for the right words in the spur of the moment depends upon your deliberation of those words ahead of time. I call this preemptive linguistic precision, or PLP. It's about taking the time to solve that incomplete section of the puzzle in your language. There are 2 parts in our language that we're going to learn to repair in this lecture. The first is learning to bridge our lexical gaps. A lexical gap is a situation where you lack a specific word or description for an idea. I'm not referring to that familiar sensation of forgetting a word where it's on the tip of your tongue. I mean instances where you're aware of a far more efficient word or phrase existing that would concisely express what you're struggling to explain. I describe this feeling as languishing because it is a linguistic anguish that we feel when we're well aware of our words falling short. For example, I was having a conversation last week and was trying to articulate my opinion on social media. And I had said, these fake things that people are convinced they need because of other people. It's a rough verbal sketch of what I was attempting to explain, and I knew it wasn't the final form of the idea. And then later I found the expression artificial desires, which succinctly captured that idea in 2 simple words: artificial desires, the fake things that people are convinced they need because of other people. I closed the gap. Becoming articulate is this process of closing the gaps that exist in our understanding of the topics that we discuss. Often they come in the form of a simple word pairing like artificial desires that summarize our ideas in a fresh, creative combination of words. Some other examples include encyclopedic command, breaches of morality, noble intentions, crowning achievement, flawed approach, artificial desires. These word pairings are one of the chief reasons why we keep a commonplace book or a personal dictionary. It is a log of the verbal solutions that we found for closing lexical gaps in our communication. This practice includes 2 steps. 1, we have to log the lexical gap. Whenever I encounter one of these trips of the tongue following the conversation, I will type it out in the Notes app on my phone or record a simple voice memo to myself, all I'm doing is using my best memory to repeat the imperfect phrase. It's not even necessary to interact with someone to begin finding these lexical gaps. Just begin talking to yourself aloud about any subject, and you'll quickly encounter a phrase that could use some polishing. And that's the second step, linguistic polishing, as I call it. We take those dissatisfying words and find an elegant alternative. It's a search and replace for your speech. Where do we begin the search for an optimal replacement? Oftentimes, I'll simply start with consulting a thesaurus. If that doesn't yield results, I will paste my poor phrasing into ChatGPT or any large language model and use the following prompt. If the phrase contains more general concepts like emotions or inanimate objects, my most treasured technique is to search poems about the topic and read through the articulate, precise descriptions that poems provide. Oftentimes we stumble upon solutions to these lexical gaps because we hear it from another person. Someone from a podcast articulates something in a crisp manner, and we think to ourselves, never heard it described it that way before. And that phrase then enters our lexicon. If you want to ever confirm how widely a phrase is used in society, I recommend using the tool Youglish, which gives you examples of how it is used in media and culture and how popular the phrase is. Solving lexical gaps is the first way to begin automatically retrieving the right words in conversation. The second method is to define dedicated terms. Most of us have not made any official agreement with ourselves about the words we have decided to use. What is very common in communication is to fall into redundancy spirals, where we layer on every adjective that comes to mind as we express an idea. For example, there are an endless, countless, unlimited number of things we can do. I want to read the book and understand, learn, and internalize the information. I see the opportunity and I want to take it, use it, and leverage it. In these examples, instead of moving forward with the delivery of my thought and covering new ground, I'm retracing previous verbal territory with variations of the same word. There's little discernible difference between these synonyms. Synonyms are words that mean nearly the same thing. When we layer them together, it's the verbal comparison of painting a wall with broad, uncoordinated brush strokes instead of a single, clean motion. Either method paints the wall, however, one is far more economical with the paint. Redundancy spirals are one of the chief culprits of why speech sounds unpolished, even if it makes sense. What is required for us is to decide on what our dedicated terms are and reinforce the use of those words in our speech. Now, there's no easy way for you to parse through every future instance of redundancy spirals. What is recommended is to take note of your redundancy spirals when they manifest in your speaking and use those occurrences to decide on which of those words you want to prioritize in your verbal brand. For example, consider this sentence. We must constantly strive to improve ourselves, seeking growth in every moment, every instance, every single opportunity that presents itself. The latter half of that sentence contains a glaring redundancy spiral. Every moment, every instance, every single opportunity. If I uttered this sentence in conversation, which would be perfectly fine, but I caught the redundancy spiral afterwards, I would take note of what I said, write it down, record it, and later decide on what I want my dedicated term to be given the context of the sentence. For example, the question is, how do I want to reference a moment? Is it an instance? Is it an opportunity? I should decide on one. This may sound trivial, but realize that imprecise speech is imprecise because many undecided words are fighting for a place in your sentence as you build it. And when this occurs multiple times in a single sentence, it feels disorganized. It feels unstable. Powerful speakers aren't making a dozen brilliant word selections in the spur of the moment. It's that they've already decided on the words for different contexts long before they use the words. Martin Luther King always spoke of the American conscience when he discussed morality in America. Stephen Fry liked to say infantile desires when referencing immature adult behavior. Steve Jobs would say half-baked product when making reference to an unfinished project. Most of these selections are unconscious. It's not that these individuals have intentionally enclosed lexical gaps or pruned redundancy spirals, but through experience and the effort of improving their speech craft, they've determined where words are dull and ordinary and made them pointed and precise. And this often naturally occurs when you deliver the same material repeatedly. You improve the clarity of delivery. This is also why it's rare to encounter articulate young people. They are working through many intricate thoughts for the first time, and it takes decades for one to organically upgrade their descriptions and decide on what their dedicated terms are as part of their verbal brand. But you can achieve clarity quickly if you maintain awareness of where your words are missing the mark. And that happens by logging your lexical gaps, practicing linguistic polishing, and deciding on your dedicated terms. The action for this lecture is to create a repository for any lexical gap you encounter in the next few weeks. You can keep this in a notes file, a physical commonplace book, or create a table inside of Nouns. The final suggestion I would make is to embrace the imperfect nature of communication. Lexical gaps and redundancy spirals can only be solved after stumbling upon them, not before, because it's difficult to map the pitfalls in advance. You have to view these encounters as a positive step in solving your linguistic puzzle. Get excited when you speak poorly, because you now can identify something that you can solve and immediately improve the selection of your words next time. And next time is one word closer to speaking greatly. For a good chapter of my life, I was frustrated by my inability to think ahead when I spoke. When I spoke, the sound of my own voice would mute the part of my mind that was trying to structure my thoughts. It was as if I was paving the road just before I drove upon it. If only I could think 3 sentences ahead. To me, everyone else seemed to know what to say. And what they said was always in the right order. It appeared orderly and thoughtful. And that was until I had a conversation with linguist and psychology professor Dr. James Pennybacker from the University of Texas at Austin. I, interviewing him, asked the question, when you speak, how far ahead are you thinking? He chuckled, leaned into his camera, and said, I don't even know how this sentence is going to end. He explained that because of the limited bandwidth of our consciousness, most sentences are started without thought as to how they're going to finish. In fact, beginning a sentence is, every time, a leap of faith. We can conceptualize an idea that may take several sentences to explain, but the construction of the individual sentences is a magical act of the moment. As we'll discuss in a future lecture on clarity, there are things that you can do to crystallize the idea in your mind so that your sentences are more clear. But the secret to creating order with your speech is not to articulate complex sentences, it is to connect simple ones, creating unity between each line of speech. That will be the focus of this lecture. Aristotle had said that every soul-touching work of art possessed the same characteristic, unity. Each component worked to support the whole. Every splinter, every sculpture, every brush stroke belonged there. There was an appropriate relationship between all elements, and we can achieve this with our language. There are 3 simple structures that we're going to unpack today that will allow you to create unity and order with your speech. Here's one of our 10 rules of articulacy. Structured sentences make thoughts appear more organized to your listener. It only takes connecting 2 to 3 sentences for your listener to be convinced that there is artistic design to your speech. The first technique is called anadiplosis, or perhaps an easier way by which to remember it is the runway and take off method. The first sentence acts as the runway. At the end of the runway are a set of words that get repeated in the beginning of the second sentence. The beginning of the second sentence is the takeoff. The idea has been introduced, it has been repeated, and now it can be expanded upon in its depth and dimensions. Here are some examples. In direct answer to your question, the answer is natural selection. The answer is natural selection because it's obvious that, and then you would continue on. Success is not final. Final is the beginning of a new journey. You reach out to friends in times of need. In times of need, that's when true friends shine. This book really made me think. Think about how our choices define us, more than we realize. Here's another one of my favorite examples from Gandalf in The Hobbit.
That can hold evil in check. But that is not what I have found. I found it is the small things. Everyday deeds of ordinary folk.
One of the more famous cultural examples of anadiplosis, the runaway takeoff method, comes from Star Wars with the character Yoda.
Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. This runway and takeoff method provides an orderly transition between sentences. This transition between sentences can be done with a single word or an entire set of words. Using this technique allows you a springboard for unpacking your thoughts. In this way, you can create a very logical flow to your speech. When you create a logical flow to your speech, listeners understand you. When they understand you, they're more likely to be persuaded and moved by your words. The second method is a simple design that you've likely already used, that of numerical ordering. This consists of naming the numerical sequence of your thoughts. For example, the first point I wish to make is the following. This leads me to my second point. Here's a brilliant demonstration of numerical ordering provided by the philosopher Bertrand Russell.
What would you think it's worth telling that generation about the life you've lived and the lessons you've learned from it?
I should like to say two things. One intellectual and one moral. The intellectual thing I should want to say to them is this.
In this excerpt, notice how Russell establishes an orderly foundation for the unfolding of his answer by first identifying how many points he wishes to make, and then begins to proceed down the list in that order. I should like to say two things, one intellectual and one moral. The first thing I should wish to say, with those simple words, this visual is subconsciously established in the listener's mind. I should like to say two things, ... One intellectual, one moral. What is remarkable about those simple lines is that expectations around future sentences are being affected. The listener knows where you are at in the timeline of delivering your answer. Just by uttering a few ordered words, you can cast a structure into the future and then pull yourself towards it as you populate that outline with words. When you populate an outline with words, the implication is that you have afforded your idea some intense thought. Consider this example from Steve Jobs.
Today, I want to tell you 3 stories from my life. That's it. No big deal. Just 3 stories.
3 stories. 1, 2, 3. Steve has now set a loose structure for the upcoming sequence of his talk. To help you use this framework, I've created a list of thought wrappers for numerical ordering. Thought wrappers are opening phrases that contain the strategic wording of your approach, so you don't have to conjure these yourself in the moment. For example, Martin Luther King would frequently use the thought wrapper, "I disagree with the premise of the question," whenever he wanted to challenge the subject asked him. Here are the thought wrappers used by articulate speakers that you can use to communicate numerical ordering. This resource will be linked below this video. The third method for speaking with structure is the periodic sentence. This is not as common as anadiplosis or numerical ordering, but it creates the entrancing effect of, this person is doing something with words, it sounds eloquent, I don't know what is happening, but gosh, is it persuasive. A periodic sentence is a sentence that has been deliberately structured with the main point located at the end. It's like a thrilling verbal journey with the destination revealed in the final words. Here are several examples. Despite the blinding snow, the freezing temperatures, and the dangerous ice roads, we made it to the airport on time. To believe in love, to be ready to give up anything for it, to be willing to risk your life for it is the true essence of love. With a heavy heart, tears in my eyes, and a sense of overwhelming loss, I finally said goodbye to my childhood home. If we were to visualize a periodic sentence, it looks something like this. Despite the blinding snow, the freezing temperatures, and the dangerous ice on the roads, we made it to the airport on time. With each step taken, with each obstacle overcome, and through sheer willpower, he achieved his dream of speaking well. When we look at this sketch, what does it remind us of? How about a classic story arc with rising tension? In fact, a periodic sentence is like telling a story with the most revealing act saved until the end. The trick of the periodic sentence is that until you've gotten till the end, until you've found that clause that completes the sentence, until you finally reach the period, you can't stop. It forces the listener along to the climax, and listeners can feel that suspense that's building behind what you say. The periodic sentence can be challenging because you have to have enough self-control to save the main verb until the end of the line. The trick that I've learned for effortlessly dispensing periodic sentences in my speech is to familiarize myself with the priming words that are used to begin periodic sentences. These include when, if, though, while, so long, because, whether, to. The simplest way to use a periodic sentence is to first identify the point you wish to make, what you would normally let stand on its own. For example, I'm excited for the weekend. That will be reserved for the end of the sentence. The next step is to pad the front of our line with detail and context. Because of a long week of challenging tasks, because of endless meetings, I am excited for the weekend. Now, I should wish to draw your attention to three things here. One, note that I began with one of the periodic sentence priming words. That word is because. Being familiar with these priming words helps easing yourself into the wording of a periodic sentence and allows for an effortless packaging of your thought. The second point I would bring to your attention is that I only had two clauses before the main point, which is a completely valid use of the periodic sentence. The most common structure of the classic periodic sentence is three dependent clauses followed by an independent clause. For example, these three clauses only make sense when they are supported by the final independent clause. With each step taken, with every obstacle overcome, and through sheer willpower, I can't stop there, in order to give this sentence a satisfying meaning, I need to read that last clause. He achieved his dream of speaking well. In our previous example, I'm excited for the weekend. I'm excited for the weekend is an independent clause because it can stand on its own. The first two clauses are dependent because they begin with because. They are falling in linguistic space, waiting for something to catch them. A common question posed in the process of generating a periodic sentence is, how do I find two or three things to mention regarding my main point? And a question I reflected on to find reasons to support your main point is, what was the journey to that conclusion? Just share the story. Through watching tutorials, practicing for hours, and making more mistakes than I can count, I have learned to play my favorite song on the guitar. Watch this example from Ronald Reagan.
This is the issue of this election. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Absolutely magical. Few understand how beautiful and unified periodic sentences can be in speech. It's beautiful because it's about creating a relationship in your sentence between two or more distant points. Many depend on one. The first few clauses are vulnerable. They require support. They've leaped into the air believing some verbal hero will catch them, and that act of cushioning their landing with the last clause just feels satisfying. It feels complete. Let's introduce the action for this video. The action for this video is to choose one of these three modes of structured speaking to work into your communication. Either anadiplosis, the runway takeoff method, numerical ordering, or the periodic sentence. I understand it can be challenging adjusting to new molds for your ideas. But remember that ease of using these structures comes down to locating the right opening words, whether they are thought wrappers or word primers. Choose one of the three structures from the worksheet below and complete the exercises to secure your understanding of these concepts. I've also included mobile wallpaper that you can add to your phone lock screen to keep them at the forefront of your consciousness throughout the day. I'll see you in the next lecture. When I was younger, I used to play a game called Suspend with my brothers. It was a creative game where the objective is to balance metal rods upon a single metal pole that's anchored to a wooden base. To be successful at the game, you have to have good hand-eye coordination to create relationships between the different sized rods all over the sculpture. One wrong move can send it all crashing down. It was always satisfying at the end to see every rod used purposefully to balance out our teetering structure. Balance is beautiful. Balance with your words is one of the highest impact areas of articulacy. When you create balance within just a few sentences, people quickly begin to view your speech with wonder and reverence. Most elite communicators understand this halo effect. The halo effect is a cognitive bias in which a single powerful impression of a person or ability, such as speaking, influences how we think and feel regarding their entire character and ability. You see someone in a positive light in one area, you're more likely to have a positive perception of them in all areas. Most of Martin Luther King's sentences were not articulate, but he was incredibly balanced with enough sentences for those few to cast the rest as beautiful. Today's lecture is going to introduce you the technique of parallelism. Parallelism is a simple way of creating balance within a sentence. This is done with the use of the conjunctions not only and but also. Consider the following. Not only does smoking harm your health, but it also makes your breath smell. She not only sings beautifully, but also plays the piano with great skill. The program not only educates students, but also inspires them to innovate. Here's a visualizer of this effect. The use of not only within the first clause immediately creates anticipation and thrusts the sentence into a state of incompleteness. In that state, the listener desires resolution. It's as if you've inhaled breath and are expecting that exhale, that satisfying release that comes with the words but also, which sets us back to normal. What we observe with parallelism is the creation of a small story within a single sentence. It's a story that not only is hanging at one point, but also demonstrates an ability to manipulate words into a mold that spans across an entire sentence. The structure in its simplest form is, here's one thing, here's another. Not only, but also. He is not only a talented musician, but also an exceptional composer. The documentary not only explored the history of the city, but also discussed its cultural significance. To use parallelism organically in your speaking, first, think of the point you were originally going to make. Instead of introducing it in a straightforward vanilla manner, append the conjunction not only somewhere in the beginning. You might say, exercising helps you stay fit. Using the parallelism technique, you could say, not only does exercising help you stay fit, but it also boosts your mood for the day. This approach not only presents the initial benefit of staying fit, but also opens up the conversation to discuss additional compelling reasons to exercise. And that's the benefit of parallelism. Parallelism directs your mental horsepower toward thinking more thoroughly about your topic. What other angle might you now include now that you've opened up that opportunity within the sentence? The action item for this lecture is to complete the parallelism worksheet below. I suggest you first read aloud the examples of parallelism provided from articulate speakers, and then proceed to create your own using the molds provided in the lower half of this resource. This will begin training your mind and mouth to recognize this linguistic pattern of parallelism so that you can demonstrate your ability to create balance with your words. One of the fastest growing silent trends over the last 5 years has been the rise of quotes. The social media feeds are often a mosaic of motivational and inspirational quotations that ignite emotion inside of people. Quotes are highly shared because what is a quote if not the essence of an idea captured in the fewest words possible, often a single sentence? The most salient version of the idea is pulled into a single frame. It's clarity. And clarity, I'm convinced, is one of the most valuable forms of linguistic currency. We want to associate, listen, and labor on behalf of those who have achieved clarity with their ideas, because ultimately we desire it for ourselves. We desire clarity in our thinking, in our speaking. There are three ingredients that make up the clear speech recipe. The first is the wording needs to be economical. Every word matters. There is no fat in your sentences. When your sentences are lean, the idea is clear. 2, the content of the sentence needs to contain direction. The idea is distilled down into its essence, usually a single profound point. Powerful quotes make one strong point well. 3 is a quality beyond language, and that is the pause. This is typically the silence that naturally follows the reciting of powerful words. The pause allows for the words to stir emotion in the listener. It's very uncommon for one to hear a profound idea and immediately continue on to the next one. These three qualities are absent from most of our recreational communication. When we engage in conversation, our wording is infiltrated by empty language, workhorse words, fillers. Our sentences attempt to make multiple points simultaneously, and we rarely pause to allow for the listener to process our ideas. The effect of this trifecta is muddled speech. The feeling it produces within us is one where our words fall short, and the response it activates within us is a frantic attempt of making sense of our words with messy follow-up sentences. We begin with a main idea, and because it is a fluffy sentence, delivered without much conscious thought beforehand, our brain thinks there's more, so we follow that sentence with a few weak ones to chip away at revealing the idea. And then another thought comes along, and we repeat the same process, usually with our best information forward. And then we take hasty second, third passes at weakly tapering off the idea. This is simply the natural structure of how we order information. We begin by revealing the bulk of our idea first. We're terrible at keeping information spoilers. And then the next sentence expands upon the idea, often reiterating the same thought with just different words. And the final few sentences are our attempt to tie together the loose ends. Damage control, as it's often known as. Ideally, our speech isn't as rough and coarse as these examples. Ideally, our speech has clear breaks between sentences, like illustrated here. This is how writing is often structured. Of course, it's far easier to do this in writing because we have time to revise our wording and have additional time to think. The key to reaping these benefits in our speaking and our spontaneous conversation is to learn how to command these breaks in our delivery, also known as pauses. Pauses result in us using fewer words. It reduces muddled messaging, and it affords us more time to consider the essence of our idea. That produces clear speech, and quite often leads to speech that is quotable. To stop speaking is the hardest habit to learn in all of speaking. People would rather speak without knowing what they say than to think in silence. It's more comfortable to keep speaking than it is to stop speaking. Joseph, I don't believe it. You're telling me that not choosing words is the most burdensome component of being articulate? Absolutely. Our mouth is constantly trying to overtake our mind. This is most evident when we find our mouth committing to words our mind doesn't understand. Our sentences have strayed off course, and we continue to speak because we're convinced that somewhere along the way we'll find our idea. It's also why we're addicted to filler words. It's our way of saying, come on, idea. We need to unwind this tense, hurried habit. And this is not accomplished through more words or bigger words. Clear speech is the outcome of learning to disengage our mouth from our mind through pausing. As we speak, Our mind is filling with information, intention, verbal invention. It can only hold so much of this before we become lost in the ocean of our language. Pausing is that breath above water that we can give ourselves. And it's the greatest gift we can give our listener. When we pause, we realign ourselves toward the telos of good communication, which, if you remember from the first lecture, is understanding, furthering understanding. Give your audience and give yourself the gift of silence. The simple action item for this video is a technique I've developed called the compressed spring line. This is the practice of affording yourself one sentence to communicate your idea. Like a loaded spring, instead of releasing a torrent of unhinged words bouncing in all directions, challenge yourself to compress your thought into a single sentence. What thought, you may ask? Well, I've provided 3 conversation excerpts below that you're encouraged to listen to. They're roughly a minute in length. First, watch the video to understand the idea. Next, start a timer for 3 minutes and think about how you might capture the essence of the idea in a single sentence. You'll find that this exercise engages your mind intensely and allows you to achieve greater clarity of thought. When the time has elapsed, say the sentence out loud or post it below this video, and I'll do what I can to give you feedback. And I'm sure I'll soon be quoting you.